This is Eye on Africa, France 24's program focused on the continent. I'm Charlie James, filling in for Georgia Calvin-Smith, and these are the headlines. Ethiopia's Prime Minister receives the Nobel Peace Prize. In his acceptance speech, Abiy Ahmed dedicated the award to those who made the ultimate sacrifice in the cause of peace. An Algerian court convicts 2 former prime ministers of corruption. The allies of longtime President Abdelaziz Bouteflika were handed hefty jail sentences. And the famous Victoria Falls runs dry. The worst drought in a century has reduced the natural wonder to a trickle of its usual self. Ethiopia's Prime Minister accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo on Tuesday. Abiy Ahmed won the prestigious award for his efforts to resolve the 2-decade-long conflict with neighboring Eritrea. Abiy himself served in the army during the war and said that experience fueled his desire for peace. Jean-Emile Jamin with more on the ceremony and the challenges still facing the Prime Minister.
I am honored to be
a Nobel medal presented for bringing peace between his country, Ethiopia, and former neighboring enemy, Eritrea. Without hesitation, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed dedicated the prize to Ethiopians and Eritreans alike, as well as his political counterpart.
I accept this award on behalf of my partner and comrade in peace, President Isaias Afwerki, whose goodwill, trust, and commitment were vital in ending the 2-decade deadlock between our countries.
But the festivities will be cut short this year. Abiy Ahmed has planned to stay only a day and a half in the Norwegian capital, refusing any media interaction for the duration. At a time when his country is torn by ethnic violence and when the implementation of the reconciliation process with Eritrea is at a standstill.
We don't want the Horn to be a battleground for superpowers, nor a hideout for the merchants of terror and brokers of despair and misery. We want the Horn of Africa to become a treasury of peace and progress.
A plea for peace, but difficulties remain to see this peace realized. In the months following his inauguration in April 2018, the young leader put an end to 20 years of deadly war between the two countries. But the momentum of democratization initiated in his country favored the affirmation of ethnic identities. Last October, anti-Abiy demonstrations led to inter-ethnic clashes, leaving nearly 90 people dead.
And for reaction from the capital, Addis Ababa, let's cross now to reporter Tom Gardner. Tom, how is Abiy's speech being received by the public there?
I mean, of course, the speech itself has been pretty well received by those who are listening. I mean, it touched the right notes. It was uplifting. It was positive and everything you'd expect really from a Nobel Prize acceptance speech. But at the end of the day, Abiy's position here in Ethiopia remains pretty fragile. It's still less than 2 months since protests erupted against him in late October, where scores died and people were chanting in his home region of Oromia, were chanting against him, burning copies of his book. And those tensions haven't disappeared overnight, and nor are they likely to anytime soon. He certainly has popular appeal still in some places, and particularly in Addis Ababa, the capital, more so than his home region. But he's not the universally popular leader that he was a year or so ago. And what was known as Abiy mania, it's not very widespread anymore. But I do think there's certain patriotic goodwill, at least, for an Ethiopian to have won the prize.
Abiy was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his international peace efforts. So how does the Prime Minister's domestic agenda, how does it match with this image of him as a peacemaker on the continent?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that his record as a peacemaker regionally is certainly, imperfect. The peace with Eritrea has pretty much stalled in the last year, well, a few months. The border crossings between Ethiopia and Eritrea have been which were opened after the peace deal, have been closed since the beginning of this year, unilaterally by the Eritrean government. But the peace deal has not been implemented. I mean, that's the crucial point here. And domestically, I mean, the country's still not at peace by any stretch. You've seen very important liberal and democratic reforms, and including for the free press, but that's not been consolidated. In some respects, is going into reverse. And most importantly, the country isn't stable. That might not be Abiy's fault alone, but it's clear that he hasn't delivered on the promise so far of law and order at the very least. And there's a sense in Ethiopia that he's been focused too much on cosmetics and optics rather than tackling the country's myriad problems, most of all ethnic violence, which has got worse in the last year. And we have elections coming up next year, and there are real concerns around those. So that's what he needs to be focusing on right now. And without peace here, I don't think the Nobel Peace Prize is going to stand for very much.
There have been foreign analysts, saying that this prize came too quickly, was immature. Is that a take that's also being reflected in Ethiopia as well?
Yes, I mean that's a widespread view. I mean, I think people, as I said, there's a sort of patriotic goodwill. He's an Ethiopian winning, a big international prize like this, and people are happy about that. But I mean, no one's under any illusions that so far, he has delivered in concrete terms what the prize is supposed to recognise. I mean, Ethiopia is not at peace, as I said before, and we have elections coming up next year where it's likely that there will be more violence unless serious measures are taken to prevent that. And at the same time, peace with Eritrea is at best described as a work in progress.
Tom Gardner in Addis Ababa, thank you so much for your reporting. Next, a developing story out of Somalia. Al-Shabaab gunmen have attacked a hotel in the capital near the president's residence. The militant group has confirmed it is behind the gun battle at the SYL hotel. Police said they killed 2 attackers and rescued 82 people from inside. The hotel is popular with government officials and lawmakers, and it isn't the first time it's been targeted by Al-Shabaab. The group frequently launches bomb and gun raids in Mogadishu in attempts to topple Somalia's UN-backed government. At least 2 people are dead in northwestern Madagascar after the first tropical storm of the season hit the nation. Cyclone Belna has left more than 1,400 people homeless in the coastal town of Sualal, and authorities say 3 people are still missing. Sualal's member of parliament said the storm's winds blew off or dislodged 80% of roofs there. Water is still rising across the city. Madagascar's prime minister will be flying to Sualal to assess the damage. Next, a landmark verdict in Algeria. Tuesday, a court there sentenced 2 former prime ministers to long prison terms for corruption. They were allies of former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, who stepped down amid mass protests back in April. The verdict's coming down just 2 days before a presidential election, which is bitterly opposed by the protest movement.
2 ex-prime ministers sentenced to more than a decade behind bars in what was the first trial of a former head of government since Algeria's independence in 1962. It's 15 years, a ban on running for office, and a seizure of assets for Ahmed Ouyaya, who was prime minister 4 times under former president Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Abdelmalek Sellal got 12 years. He was prime minister twice and organised Bouteflika's election campaigns. The 2 were among 19 defendants tried on charges including money laundering and abuse of office. One former industry minister, Abdeslam Bouchouareb, who's on the run abroad, was sentenced to 20 years prison, while 2 others were sentenced to 10 years. Defence lawyers boycotted the trial, saying it was politicised and influenced by a desire to settle scores. Some Algerians, however, felt the punishment was too lenient.
The sentence isn't fair. It doesn't go far enough.
We wanted them to be jailed for 50 years or more. They should die in jail and never get out.
The verdicts come just 2 days before Algeria is due to elect a president to replace Bouteflika, who resigned in April after mass demonstrations. The country's protest movement, however, sees the election as a ploy by the regime to cling on to power.
Finally, on the program, we take you to one of the natural wonders of the world, Victoria Falls. Located on the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe, the UNESCO World Heritage Site draws millions of visitors each year. But following a record drought in the region, the largest waterfall in the world has almost completely dried up. Laurent Bestecheur takes us there.
Its gushing waterfalls once stood as a testament to the power of nature. But months of drought have reduced the world-famous Victoria Falls to a mere trickle.
It's normal for every season to be dry like that, but this season it started as early as June. So this is one of I would say it's the longest dry season we've ever had.
Locals worry this unusually long dry season could kill one of the region's biggest tourist attractions, which currently draws millions of visitors each year. But southern Africa's worst drought in a century is already having disastrous consequences for local populations. Dried up riverbeds and crop failures have left around 45 million people in need of food aid in the region.
Rains were so good, we were getting enough food. But nowadays, at least these years, there's no rain.
As climate change intensifies, experts predict that sites like Victoria Falls could become completely dried up in the near future.
The Southern African region, 5 decades from now, will be unrecognizable compared to the region we are living in today.
Zimbabwe and Zambia have also been suffering frequent power cuts in recent months, as both rely heavily on hydroelectric dams downstream of Victoria Falls.
That's all for this edition of Eye on Africa, but do stay with us here on France 24. My colleague Thomas Waterhouse is up next with more news you need to know.